So, you just saw one battle after another, or you've tried to read a Thomas Pynchon book before, but failed because it was too hard, or heard how hard some of his books are and never got started. Well, if that is you, today I'm going to drop some hot fire recommendations personalized for 3 different types of readers, which include the beginner readers, the advanced readers, and then all my schizo readers out there. Let's go, everyone. And so, you have come to the right place for these recommendations because Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Thomas Pynchon here on YouTube. In the playlist right down there below, you will find videos on Pynchon's books, his life, and his philosophy on many different aspects of the world. And I have personal experience with recommending Pynchon to people because I was once that guy. Trying to give my new age ex-girlfriend who was reading Eat, Pray, Love, Gravity's Rainbow. But I have evolved, and over the past year, I have run a Pynchon book club where I have talked with dozens of different type of readers and heard their reactions to almost all of Pynchon's novels. And so I have data to back up my claims, or personal anecdotal data, and so I hope to deliver on my promise. And so let's talk about our first category. And I will put some chapters down below for the 3 different types of readers. So our first reader, and when I say beginning reader, I don't mean that you are like illiterate. And I think most people are just going to click on the advanced button because none of us like to think of ourselves as beginner readers. But what I mean by that is someone who is new to the world of literary fiction and postmodernism, because Thomas Pynchon is one of the kings of postmodernist literature, which is notoriously confusing. Even postmodernist theory, people like Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, are laborious to read. Like, my God, they did not make it easy to find out what they are talking about. I have guides on my shelf to all of their books. You know, when you have to have a guide to read the book, which includes there's a guide to get Gravity's Rainbow, maybe the book is a little too hard. Anyway, so if you are a reader who maybe hasn't ventured into some of the harder classics or postmodernist literature in general, or you're just new to reading or coming back to reading after not doing it since high school, then these recommendations right now are going to be for you. And I'm going to kind of walk you through the pathway of what I think you should read from start to finish. And so my main belief when it comes to this kind of more beginner crowd is that momentum is key, because the end goal is to get you to read Gravity's Rainbow, which many consider Pynchon's hardest work. And not just to have you read it, but be able to kind of come into it with a bit of confidence and not be kind of blindsided by some of the BS and some of the traps that he kind of puts in there. So if you are new to Pynchon, actually, everyone should start with the same book, which is The Crying Lot of 49. And not coincidentally, this is Pynchon's shortest novel. And one of the reasons why it's so short, because he had to kind of meet a deadline to finish it. But for us, when we are dealing with some of these, which are 700, 800, 900 page novels, having something that's 150 pages, but encompasses many of his greatest ideas and accomplishments as a writer is a really great place to start. And so I'm going to speak to the beginners right now. And so my recommendation is, first of all, commit to finish. Like, if you try to read Gravity's Rainbow, I wouldn't say try to commit, because you'll most likely fail, because it's one of the most unfinished books ever. And it's going to take you dozens of hours to finish. But even if you are confused at times with The Crying Lot of 49, there are a vast amount of resources about this novel to get you back on track. And if you are confused, you will be kind of guided by Pynchon back into kind of the main points. And so this novel features a female detective protagonist, Oedipa Maas, and there'll be no spoilers, like, other than what you could kind of read in the 1 or 2 paragraph blurb on the back of the novel in this video, FYI. And the story kicks off because one of her ex-lovers, who's some like mogul in real estate, which is actually a theme in many Pynchon novels, leaves her to be the executor of his estate. And so while doing this, she basically runs into a web of conspiracies. And this is Pynchon 101. If you saw the Vineland movie, which you probably did, one battle after another, you could see that like intelligence operations, secret society stuff is present in that movie, and it's present actually in that novel too. But in this, it's even more so. And when you get inside Pynchon's mind and can read it, you feel like you are a part of the madness. You are wondering, is this just coincidences, or is actually there a big mailing conspiracy going on? And so Pynchon talks about this as a failure kind of as a novelist, but I think when authors kind of talk about that, I think that they mean that they maybe release a little bit too much about how they think into the world, which is actually kind of a theme here. So Thomas Pynchon is known as a reclusive author. And so something that I try to do on this channel is talk about authors to try to motivate people to get into them. You know, I have 200 videos on Cormac McCarthy, over 100 on David Foster Wallace, and their works can be hard. And the more you learn about someone, the more you want to learn about their works and see why they did what they did on various rereads and all of that. But with Pynchon, we don't exactly have that, other than a couple articles written on him by like ex-friends and people like that, and his introductions to his some of his stories in Slow Learner. We have little to no information about him. And so because of that, we are basically kind of wandering around. And so this novel right here is going to fill in a slot in your head of what will come later in the journey. So when you read this, I would recommend maybe getting a subscription for a free subscription, don't pay anybody, to like Lit Charts, or find an online guide to follow along with if you are confused, like really confused. Like if you're not, then follow along, then read all that stuff later, like figure out what the hell happened. But if you're confused, say, I'm confused. Don't beat yourself up about it. You're not an idiot. I recently reread this with our book club, and I was like, on 5 hours of sleep the day I cracked it open. I think I'd read it 2 times before, and I was somewhat confused for a second. Then I had to like reorient. I was like, no, I'm going to read this later, like when I actually feel okay. And I know what happens. And so don't beat yourself up about it, but move through it knowing that this is a similar feeling to what's going to be happening later on in kind of the canon. And know that this really isn't necessarily a representation of Pynchon himself, because the next novel we are going to talk about is Inherent Vice, which got turned into a movie also by Paul Thomas Anderson. And I do believe that to get people into works, that if there's a movie adaptation, it's one of the best things. But there is an article by Julie Siegel, who is a former friend of Thomas Pynchon, who apparently Thomas Pynchon like screwed his wife, and like so he wrote this article seemingly in spite in Playboy magazine. But if you read that article, which came out I think in the 1980s, if I remember correctly, it basically depicts Pynchon as this kind of lustful hippie, which Doc Sportello in Inherent Vice basically embodies. Inherent Vice, and one could say Vineland and some level Bleeding Edge, and many of Pynchon's later novels are really kind of explorations into his own interests and into his own psyche and thoughts about the world. So in The Crying Lot of 49, in V, and in Gravity's Rainbow, we get these more political, deep level looks at conspiracies and all these things. But they are hard to kind of get into, and they're very layered and require a lot of previous knowledge, and there's, like I said, there's a whole companion trying to tell you what's happening in it. And my thought process on kind of recommending some of these more personalized Pynchonian novels first is that by getting into who he is as an individual and how he thinks, which he kind of lives through in some of these characters and the outlook of some of these characters, like Pynchon was kind of this hippie dude who had this kind of outlook toward the world. Then by doing that, you can fall in love with him and the style and create your own creative interpretation of who he was as a person, because it's iceberg theory on steroids. You know, Hemingway wrote sparsely on purpose so that everyone would theorize about him, but by not being present as a modern author where everything is revealed about everyone, we make these interpretations about the author, which is actually great because it creates more intrigue about the author. And Pynchon knows this, and I think that's one of the reasons why he kind of turned to one of these more personalized novels. So Inherent Vice is about a private eye detective. This is going to be a theme, named Doc Sportello, who is dealing with, once again, his ex-lover. This is actually a theme that we come back to time and time again, who has kind of got into it with this real estate mogul, and she goes missing. They go missing. And so Doc Sportello, who's this hippie dude played by Joaquin Phoenix in Inherent Vice, like, hey man, goes on this journey to go and find them. and, hits all these various groups. He hits, the FBI, the gangs, the surfers, all these different groups that are trying to control what is happening in this blossoming time in the early 1970s, if I remember correctly, in Southern California, because California had a dramatic shift into what it is today, with all the, at some point, Orange County was groves of oranges, and, many of these places that are just highways now with houses filled up everywhere were fields and were being developed, and there were power grabs and all these different things and sketchy stuff going on because drugs weren't as regulated, and there were cults and the Manson family. All of that is explored and more in Inherent Vice. And so if you are a fan of 60s culture, of 70s culture, then this is a novel for you. This is one of Pynchon's more accessible novels by far. And at the end, you get the payoff of getting to see Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin is a absolutely great actor, odd dude, but most artists are, I'm an odd guy too. And this book can lag at times. It can be like, why am I reading this? But I think that if you are going into this saying that this is a worldview, I am learning about the 60s and 70s and how it was corrupted, then you will get a lot out of it. I actually have I have a video titled 10 novels that prove Western civilization is dying. And I include this novel in that and speak on it for probably 20 or 30 minutes. And so once you do read it, I don't even think I have spoilers in there, but I have a really good companion guide really talking about some of the conspiracies and under the level stuff happening in that novel. Plus, if you want to join my Thomas Pynchon book club, which I can talk about right now, which is on Substack. So we read one Thomas Pynchon novel every single month, and we are going to actually be reading his 3 larger novels in 2026. If you are interested in that, I have a link down in the description below. Plus, if you sign up, you get access to 6 to 10 other book clubs that I hold every single month on transformative literature, and access to daily content and a ton of other cool stuff if you want to support me. And so I have a ton of archived Pynchon calls over there if you want even more support and more thoughts on the novel from a wide variety of people from all around the world. It's really with Pynchon about rereading and just getting more information once you get the plot details out of the way to kind of deepen your understanding. A lot of these postmodernist authors are so fun, in my opinion, because I get more information about reality when I finish reading them. I get to research and learn all these new things. And so I get to have fun and I get to learn all at the same time. And so I would then read Inherent Vice. And so now we're at the point, if you are a beginner, that you know what's going on. And so I would then read one of 2 novels. I would either read Vineland, which just got adapted, or I would read Bleeding Edge. And so Vineland, if you saw the movie One Battle After Another, is basically about the failure of the hippie movement, of revolutionary movements and the fallout of it, of the transformation that happened from the 1960s to the 1980s. And so if you're interested in all that, and the book goes much more into depth about it all than the movie does, and the movie cut a lot of things, even though I think it was really good, and it's hard to turn a book into a movie, especially a Pynchon book. I would check that out. But I would actually recommend for a lot of people Bleeding Edge, which is his 2013 novel, which once again features a female protagonist detective in New York City in September 2001. Yes, and 9/11 is included in this novel, who is investigating a billionaire CEO that's involved, that made money off the dot-com boost. It gets into everything. It gets into all the conspiracies about what happened. It has Pynchon's thoughts on technology, the internet, virtual reality, all these different things. So if you are into technology and want to read a more modern novel about the early 2000s about technology, this is one of the best novels on that. And so I would pick one of these. And then after reading one of that, I feel like you'll have a conception of how Pynchon feels about the world. You could also read Shadow Ticket, which is coming out October 7th by Pynchon, because I feel like reading the most recent things, even though I can't tell you if it's going to be accessible or not, I hear that it is a good idea. But if it is your 3rd Pynchon novel, then I think you will have trained yourself, if you are a beginner reader, to take what it's going to be, because it's not a long novel. So unless all the reviewers are just geniuses and underplaying how difficult it is, I would think that it should be pretty easy for you to read by this point. And so once you are done with that, it is definitely time for Gravity's Rainbow. No holds barred. I mean, you could read one of his longer novels, but I think by this point, after having read 3 Pynchon novels, it's time to return to conspiracies. It's time to return to what The Crying Lot of 49 left off and read one of the greatest American novels ever written. I would recommend that you buy the Steven Weisenberg Companion Guide. I would recommend that you find a group, whether it's mine or someone else's, to join if you can, if any are active. I would recommend that you find online resources to figure out what's happening in each chapter if you don't understand what's happening. So plot details don't kind of slip by. Get help. The plot doesn't necessarily matter. You aren't going to understand everything that's happening in this on your first read, so you might as well understand a little bit more than what you would get anyway, so that you can leave this experience of reading Gravity's Rainbow, one of the more difficult and awesome novels ever written, with more. Because if you leave the plot at the door, like I would just spoil it right now for you, but I won't, then you can really kind of tap into the novel and just focusing on some of the beautiful moments. And at this point, if you've read 3 Pynchon novels, you've probably activated yourself maybe into the world of knowledge and postmodernist literature and conspiracies. And a lot of the stuff that's being talked about is going to help you. And then there will be an unlimited amount of things to go and research. You can go research the Kabbalah and Rilke, all these different things, if you want to, or not. But I think at that point, you will be ready. And if you can read Gravity's Rainbow, one of the reasons why you prime yourself for this, because if you read Gravity's Rainbow and you finish it and you understand some of it, you will be a better reader. You feel accomplished. I swear to God, you guys, when I finish William Gass's The Tunnel or whatever book, and it's hard and I labor through it, I feel more intelligent, I feel more confident, and everything after this will be easier and you will understand it even more. And so that's why I'm setting it right here. You could read one of his other longer works, but I don't feel like it would necessarily be worth it. And so I'm going to strike you early with Gravity's Rainbow in this journey and ask you to push yourself. And then when you are done with that, you have some options. So you could go read his first novel, V, which is more in the vein of Gravity's Rainbow, and The Crying Lot of 49. Or if you want another longer work and you kind of want to continue the challenge, you can go check out Mason and Dixon or Against the Day. And at that point, I would just say, like, what do you feel? Do you want a shorter work in the more conspiracy zone, more in the style of Gravity's Rainbow and The Crying Lot like V? Or you maybe read Bleeding Edge or Vineland, which is still on the table if you want kind of an easy read to keep the momentum, if I'm going to help you get through all of his works. Or if you're motivated, then go read the synopsis of Against the Day or Mason and Dixon and see if one of those interests you, but just know that it won't be as hard as Gravity's Rainbow, but it definitely is a slog. And so that is my preferred reading order for beginners, and I've seen it work time and time again. My dad, who is 65 now, I think, or 66 if I remember correctly, just went through this reading order. He actually had read Gravity's Rainbow a really long time ago. But he would say that by the time that he got to Gravity's Rainbow at this point, and he isn't, the strongest reader anymore, he usually just reads for like 30 to 45 minutes, before bed after a long day, not the most like energetic type of reading. He will say that he understands where to skip now, what not to care about, that there are going to be some things that he just doesn't understand, but he's there for kind of the Slothrop story or whatever. And so now let's talk about all my advanced readers out there. And for those who have skipped to this section, what I mean by advanced reader is that first you have some form of familiarity with classic literature or more so postmodernist literature, and you've read in that genre before. Or you just consider yourself a motivated, high IQ individual who can commit to the finish. But just like every other group, I am going to recommend that you start with The Crying Lot of 49 by Pynchon. This is Pynchon's shortest novel. It is one of his more schizo novels, and it is a really good introduction to the style that you are going to confront in our next novel, which is going to be much harder and much longer. And if you have any trouble reading this novel or are confused or feel like you have some hangups about Pynchon's writing style or anything like that, then I would recommend circling back to what recommendations I give in the beginner reader section, which I know beginner has this negative connotation. But with Pynchon, we're all beginners. We all don't understand what's going on. I've reread some of these books 5+ times and still am learning things and trying to piece it all together. And so if you get through this book and you enjoy it and, the style, the mazes, then you 100% for your second novel, I'm going to say it here first because you are an OG, need to read one of the greatest, if not the greatest American novel ever written, which is Gravity's Rainbow. But because you are an advanced reader. And I assume that means that you read in other fields, history, philosophy, psychology, spirituality, religion, the occult, all of these things. Then I would recommend that you get the companion guide, because if you have the ability to read Gravity's Rainbow, that doesn't mean that you are going to necessarily understand at large what Gravity's Rainbow is about. And you aren't going to get as much as you could to kind of tickle your brain pickle. And when I first read this book, I didn't have a companion, but when I came back to it, there were references to so many cool things that were either hidden or just overt that I missed that I was already interested in. Like, for instance, the poet Rainer Marie Rilke, who is a famous German poet who I am actually translating right now, his collection, Sonnets to Orpheus, in full for my own debut poetry collection coming up soon, is referenced a ton throughout this. The Kabbalah and like the occult, which I'm very interested in, referenced a ton in Gravity's Rainbow. But you may have no idea, first of all, about Rilke or the Kabbalah or United Fruit or various other things. But this should be a learning opportunity for you. One of the reasons why I love Infinite Jest, Europe Central by William T. Vollmann, Gravity's Rainbow, is that they have broadened my knowledge of crazy things that I would have maybe never known about unless I had read this book. And a lot of the time we get these very broad views of history. Like, I love history audiobooks. But even in really good history audiobooks, you can listen to a 5-part series on the Pacific War. Like, I remember I listened to Ian Toll's series. But I've learned stuff about the Pacific Theater from literature that don't get covered in your typical audiobook. They're a little bit too esoteric, odd, and don't really fit into this like big narrative. But somehow an author, and this is our job, as artists, can find this psychic link between that and the story and somehow make it work. And so Gravity's Rainbow will not just like be an awesome read, but it will recontextualize, reframe, and so many other things that you already know about, plus introduce you to so many cool things. And I think that the way that you're going to get the most out of that is a companion guide. You don't have to buy this one. This is the best one. And I usually recommend, using this and maybe even using just like another online guide, whatever one you want that's out there for free. And I think once you do that and once you get through this novel, you are going to be highly impressed by Pynchon. And it's something that I actually talk about to authors all of the time, that why do people sit down and spend 30 hours on a book, especially a transformative one that isn't exactly entertaining? Why are they going to buy the book, buy the companion, get the online guide, listen to podcasts about it? Because there is something there that's changing them within. There's something transformative or educational that's stirring something within their soul. And what that actually is doing is that when I read Thomas Pynchon and he recontextualizes or reframes how I personally look at one of my favorite poets who I am translating, that makes me trust him more. It's honestly crazy. Like, if you go to a local restaurant and you go there for the first time and it's a really good meal, great service, you're like, damn, let's go do that again. If you keep going and it keeps being the same, then at some point you really trust them. And when you go there, you have no worry that it's going to be a good experience. And if it isn't, it's going to be like, what happened? The same is true with reading. And this really isn't talked about. When you are a transformative author and you're creating these mini blips in people's physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual souls or systems, then the reader starts to trust you more. They start to investigate a little bit more. And that's what I'm really trying to kick off with you guys in terms of recommending Gravity's Rainbow, in the sense that if you can learn to trust Pynchon and open yourself up to him, and not, here, join the cult, and not really question the bad parts and be able to move through those, knowing that maybe it's just not for you right now, but it does mean something, then as you move through his other 7 novels, you are going to have a much better experience. I should say 6 novels in his collection of short stories. And so there is my second recommendation. Just hop right into it. And then when you are done with that, you have 2 pathways. So what tends to happen after reading something like a Gravity's Rainbow, an Infinite Jest, another 1,000-page, post-modernist tome, you may feel a little bit burned out. And so some people feel burned out, or some people want to move on to the next hardest thing. And so if you want to move on to the next hardest novel as an advanced reader, you read Gravity's Rainbow and you're like, dude, that was easy, that was great, no big deal, then I would recommend the historical novel Mason and Dixon. It is written in a different style than Gravity's Rainbow, which some people have trouble with, but I assume that is not going to be you. Or you can read Against the Day. And then at that point, I would circle back to his novel V, because that is really important, because V, The Crying Lot of 49, and Gravity's Rainbow are somewhat all connected, all have a similar meaning, similar themes, and one could say a similar arc, and they share similar characters. And so now returning to everyone else, if you felt a little bit burned out, then I would actually recommend going back and doing V, because V is a really good mix, and at some level is one of Pynchon's more straightforward novels, even though there is this elusive search for V, and at times it can become meandering. I think after you finish Gravity's Rainbow, you will see V as kind of Gravity's Rainbow light, and then you will kind of be immersed and kind of tap into many of, as I just said, some of these big themes that he's talking about. Then you can kind of leave that era behind. Because between Gravity's Rainbow, which was published in 1973, and Vineland, which was published in 1990s, Pynchon had a 17-year publishing gap. And during that time, he basically changed this style into something one could call more accessible. I mean, he definitely started writing differently and never really returned to that Gravity's Rainbow kind of intense style, or the style of his first three novels. And so I think that chunking it in eras could be really smart. And then you can move on to the new era. And I would just say, either you could start with Shadow Ticket, which is the new release, and work your way back, or you should work your way forward. So you could start with Vineland and go all the way to his newest publication, or start at his newest publication and work your way back, which is a pretty fun thing to do. And that's what I actually recently did in my rereading of Pynchon, as I started with his newest novel, which, has a lot to do with technology, and Bleeding Edge. Shadow Ticket is set in like the 1930s, so that won't. And then move your way back, because Shadow Ticket, Bleeding Edge, and Inherent Vice are going to be pretty easy novels, some of the more accessible novels, but they are very cultural, and they will actually kind of give you a nice break, and there's movie adaptations and stuff, to then go read his two of his other longer novels, Against the Day, which is over 1,000 pages, and Mason and Dixon, which is like over 700 pages. And so then by the time you reach Vineland, you'll have a really good picture of what Pynchon was trying to do. And I know the movie One Battle After Another came out, and people probably really want to go read Vineland. And so you can throw that in wherever in this ordering. But I think that Vineland, and something that I realized, and I just reread it for my for the Right Conscious Book Club, is that it really was seen as this like flop, or like Pynchon lost some of his pizzazz and couldn't live up and write another Gravity's Rainbow again or whatever. But I think Pynchon realized that he needed to do things more subtly, that if he wanted to talk about, intelligence agencies and the breaking up of the 60s and the 70s and all of this, that he would have to do it in a different way. And I think by the time you read at least Against Inherent Vice, Bleeding Edge, and I'm sure Shadow Ticket, you'll have a much better picture of what Pynchon is really trying to say about intelligence agencies, about like the U.S. government's role in like taking out these these movements, and does the U.S. government have our best interest at heart? All that stuff, I think, in Vineland, more so than Inherent Vice and Bleeding Edge and Shadow Ticket, is more explored. But I think he still kind of has that Gravity's Rainbow dog inside of him. And so I think kind of breaking yourself away from that and getting more into your feels as an advanced reader, and you'll blow through some of these novels like Bleeding Edge, Inherent Vice, Shadow Ticket should be really easy for you to read if you got through Gravity's Rainbow. And then when you do his two historical novels, Against the Day and Mason and Dixon, by the time you get back to Vineland, you're going to have this entire picture, and I think the payoff will be awesome. That's just my opinion, but I just had a really awesome experience reading Vineland, and I haven't only read that like one time before, and it's been a while. And now coming back after doing everything else, it makes a lot more sense, and I kind of see what he was doing and why he made that break from Gravity's Rainbow to that. And so that is my recommendations for all my advanced readers out there. Just to recap one more time: Crying Lot of 49, then Gravity's Rainbow. If you are highly motivated, you could read one of his historical novels, Against the Day or Mason and Dixon. But I would probably recommend circling back to V, completing kind of the early era than either reading from Vineland, all the way to Shadow Ticket, or reading from Shadow Ticket all the way to Vineland. Because if you read from Vineland through, then you will get kind of this training in Vineland, and then in Bleeding Edge, which is about like the .com bust and technology, you'll kind of feel like it's been completed. Like you'll feel like, okay, I see where everything went. All the stuff that he talks about, this is where it ends up. So I think that that's a really good path too. And so let's talk now to all of my schizo readers out there, all of my guys out there who are smart, but maybe you're smoking a little bit too much Bubba Kush. Maybe you whacked your head and got too many concussions in your life. Maybe you're just looking for the conspiracies. You're just looking for the crazy shit. So let's talk about it. You need to start with the Crying Lot of 49. Everybody does, in my opinion. It is a beautiful exploration of conspiracies, of this idea of, is it just a coincidence, or is it actually real? Are these synchronicities just appearing because I'm more observant, or are they real and being projected onto me from some other force? This novel really gets to the heart of that, and it's 150 pages. So even if you are blasting the Bubba Kush, or are twitching to get back to your documentary or X or whatever platform you're obsessed with, I think that Crying Lot should be a good training ground to kind of show you what Pynchon is all about. And if you get confused along the way, look up some online guides. Honestly, it will help you kind of understand, if you're lost, what is happening and get you on track, because there are so many references to like conspiracies and callbacks and all this stuff. And if that's what you're interested in, if that's what you heard Thomas Pynchon is all about, then that is the place to start. And so next on our list, once you get through this, which I know you're going to get through, and if not, then, this is one of the easier books, then I am going to recommend to you Bleeding Edge, because guess what this is about? This takes place in New York City at the start of September 2001 and goes through 9/11. And Thomas Pynchon was a resident of New York City and does have strong opinions about what happened, that don't align with the normal narrative. And he talks about it at length. Pynchon implies a lot here, but he also talks about the groups that he think did that event, And this novel is not just about that. It's also about technology. It's about the .com bust. It's about AI. It's about video games. Once again, like the Crying Lot of 49, if you like the Crying Lot of 49, it has a very similar character in Oedipus Mass. There's a female detective in this one named Maxine, who's very similar to her, who's trying to bring down this kind of tech billionaire, this Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg type of guy, who's actually, she thinks, maybe behind or not behind some of the major events in this novel. And it's a pretty awesome read. It's a pretty awesome read to see one of the greatest American minds talk about technology and write about it eloquently. And if you are a schizo reader or individual into all these things, and you have done that through the internet, the medium is the message, as McLuhan said. And this medium, an analog book about technology by a great mind, is a really good place to get some momentum, because that's what it's about. That's what I'm here to help you do. I want to help you, a schizo reader like myself, get the momentum to finish Thomas Pynchon, all of his books, kind of get the entire picture that he's trying to paint about American society and all of these things. And so once you are done with that, I think I want to help you continue that momentum by recommending Pynchon's first novel, V. And so V is almost a precursor to Gravity's Rainbow. In the last section, I called it Gravity's Rainbow Light. And the goal here is to help you get through Gravity's Rainbow, because that is the most schizo novel of all. That is the king. But I feel like if you have read Bleeding Edge, and you could skip Bleeding Edge and hop right into V if you feel so inclined, or Bleeding Edge isn't calling to you, I feel like V is a more fleshed out Crying Lot of 49 that has some definite problems, has some definite sections that you may just kind of be like bleh through, but by the end, there is going to be a payoff. There are multiple symbols and ideas in this novel that have stuck with me throughout my entire life, that have, been really strong reframings of, for me about reality. And I want you to go into this saying that I'm going to read this so that I feel more comfortable reading Gravity's Rainbow, because as a schizo reader, I want to help you get the most out of these conspiracies, out of these kind of rabbit holes. But the priming that Pynchon puts in V, kind of having this elusive V, much like in the Crying Lot of 49, much like in almost every single one of his novels, is something that's explored at a very advanced at-length level in Gravity's Rainbow, and I want you to get a little bit more comfortable with it. But reading V and the Crying Lot of 49 are important because they are basically the prequels to Gravity's Rainbow. They are building on themes, there are characters and ideas that are shared, especially in V and Gravity's Rainbow. And by the time you reach Gravity's Rainbow, if you've read about them before and kind of understand what he's trying to do, Gravity's Rainbow should be much more of a breeze. And so once you are done with V, it's time for Gravity's Rainbow. And I recommend that you get the Gravity's Rainbow Companion if you are going to try and read it. Because I've said this multiple times, but there is so much in this novel that you are going to miss. And if you are into these conspiracies, if you're trying to find all these connections, if you're trying to follow this kind of schizo mind that Thomas Pynchon has, then I think you'll get the most out of it by seeing all the connections he's making, by seeing the stack of documents. This is the stack of documents. These are the secret codes, the cheat code manual. Do you guys remember those back in the day for like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas? Like, this is the cheat code manual to what's happening in Gravity's Rainbow. And I want you to understand it. I want you to leave Gravity's Rainbow with an entire different conception of America, of how you feel about conspiracy theories or your schizo mindset on whatever, because that's what Thomas Pynchon did more for me than maybe anybody else in the literature world, is made me rethink this quest for knowledge, this quest for the next conspiracy, for the next thing, and make me look at myself and be like, why am I doing this? Why do I even trust any of this information? And that rabbit hole is going to lead you down the schizo rabbit hole. But then once you get through that, you're going to hit this bodhisattvic mindset where you can exist between both worlds, which I think literature should hopefully help us do in whatever journey we're on. But I don't want you to be a complete schizo, but I also don't want you to be a complete NPC. And I don't think Pynchon wants you to be either. But he wants you, and these novels make you ride that line in the middle, because there are a lot of false starts in this novel and many of his novels where you'll be exploring something and you think it's a big deal and then it's not a big deal, or you'll think something isn't a big deal but then it's a big deal. There is the amount of programming and conspiracies and intelligence agency madness in this novel is out of this world. And that's why I think it's so important to have some training, because everything that people talk about now, like there's that guy who talks about like the Nazis on drug, Blitz, and all that. Pynchon already talked about that. People talk about, America was doing terrible things in World War II too, and the Allies were terrible too. Pynchon talks about all these underage girls getting exploited in this novel by, the Harvard alumni, by the Skull and Bones, all that stuff. That's explored at length. There's so many corruptions of morals. All the sides are blend together in this novel, which makes it like really hard to kind of sift through and kind of understand that, in the zone, in the war, after the war, there was a consolidation of power once the Nazis were gone or kind of fading away that was very immoral, that was totalitarian. And Thomas Pynchon was hip to this all the way back in the 1960s and wrote a really slamming novel about it all. And so now what we think is commonplace, Pynchon had already tuned into, plus he was doing it at an earlier time. He was doing it as someone who was involved with Boeing and in the war and knew people involved in the war, much closer to the source, which is important because now here we are finding documents, making shock jock statements online, doing all this stuff. But Pynchon in a narrative form, without having to be a shock jock and say something online about World War II, said everything about World War II. And that is quite the accomplishment. This is why this is one of the greatest World War II novels of all time, even though it takes place mostly after World War II or in the closing days of it. And so once you are done with Gravity's Rainbow, then I think it's time to get into the schizo novels themselves. I would start actually with Vineland. I would skip from Pynchon's 1973 novel and fly over that 17-year gap where he didn't publish anything and go read Vineland. If you saw the movie One Battle After Another, then you know what this is kind of about. But this will just kind of stoke the conspiracy mind, stoke the schizo mind, because this novel is about how intelligence agencies ruined the movements in the 1960s and 70s. And once you are done with that, you can kind of tap into the actual 60s and 70s in Inherent Vice. And then I think at that point, you should probably read his newest novel, if not right here, Shadow Ticket, which is going to be talking about intelligence agencies in the 1930s. If you haven't already read it, read Bleeding Edge if you didn't finish it. And then you should circle back to his historical novels, Against the Day and Mason and Dixon. And I think that will be the most schizo conspiratorial road that you can take with Pynchon. And so, boom, there it is, everyone. There is 3 different pathways for 3 different types of readers, so that all of you guys can read Thomas Pynchon and we can change the world. We can create a literary renaissance. Literature can change your life. Thomas Pynchon can change your life, especially if you're willing to do the research and kind of get into him more. And so thank you guys for being here. I hope all of you guys have a good day. Happy reading. Let me know how this reading order worked. Let me know if you have a different recommendation down below if you are still listening. And I will see you guys very, very soon in the next video.